The six men didn't move. They stood in a half circle around her car at 12:47 in the morning, dressed in civilian clothes that didn't quite fit the way civilians wore them. Too deliberate, too still. Megan Holloway had her keys in her hand before she even cleared the hospital's side door, the way she always did, the way her instructor had drilled into her 8 years ago at Fort Bragg. She stopped 6 feet out, counted them, noted the spacing. Then the one in front spoke a name, a date, a grid coordinate she hadn't heard out loud since the worst night of her life. Her keys hit the pavement. If this story gets to you the way it got to me, follow along until the very end. Hit like, drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I genuinely want to know how far this one travels. The shift had been bad in the ordinary way hospital shifts go bad. Not catastrophic, no code blues, no trauma alerts, just the grinding kind of bad where everything takes longer than it should, and the people who are supposed to help you keep finding reasons not to. Megan had spent 40 minutes trying to get a pharmacy hold released on a pediatric patient's antibiotic because the attending had written the wrong dosage unit and then gone home, and the on-call resident who was supposed to authorize the correction kept not answering his pager. She'd finally gotten it done by calling the charge pharmacist directly, which was technically outside her lane, and she'd gotten a look from the floor supervisor that said she'd be hearing about it tomorrow. She was used to the looks. Redwood Children's Medical Center sat at the north end of Ashford, a mid-sized city in central Oregon that smelled like pine and diesel, and had a hospital that was by any honest measure a good one. It served a large pediatric population, had a solid NICU, and its oncology floor had outcomes that would have been impressive at institutions 3 times its size. Megan had chosen it for those reasons, and because no one there knew her, which had mattered a lot 3 years ago when she arrived, and still mattered now in ways she didn't examine too carefully. She worked pediatric oncology. She was good at it. Her patients liked her, their parents trusted her, and her coworkers found her competent and slightly difficult to read, which was exactly how she preferred it. What they didn't know, and what she didn't discuss, was that she had spent 4 years in the Army Nurse Corps, including 14 months attached to a special operations support element in a place the Army didn't officially acknowledge running medical operations. What they didn't know was that she had worked in conditions that would have been unrecognizable as nursing by anyone trained in a civilian hospital, on dirt floors and moving vehicles, in darkness, with equipment that was never quite enough, and patients who were dying faster than she could work. She had saved people who weren't supposed to be savable. She had also lost people she should have been able to keep. She didn't talk about any of it. She came to work, she did her job, she went home to her apartment with its 3 houseplants and its 1 comfortable chair and the book she was always in the middle of. She paid her rent. She called her mother on Sundays. She was 31 years old and she had learned to live inside a very small perimeter, which was its own kind of survival. The parking lot at that hour was almost empty. The night shift's cars were clustered near the main entrance. The day shift had cleared out hours ago. Her car, a 7-year-old Subaru with a dented rear quarter panel she kept meaning to fix, was parked in the 3rd row under a light that flickered twice per minute like a slow pulse. She saw the men when she was still 30 feet away, and she felt it before she processed it. The old alertness snapping on like a circuit completing. 6 of them. Spread out, not bunched, not looking at their phones. 1 near her driver's door, 2 flanking, 3 positioned back. They were watching the lot, not her, until she cleared the door, and then they were watching her. Her hand found her phone inside her jacket pocket. She didn't take it out. She kept walking at the same pace, and she thought, assess, don't react. They weren't in uniform. They were wearing the kind of civilian clothes that people in the military wear on their days off. Dark jeans, plain jackets, boots that were chosen for function. The one near her car was about 40, broad through the shoulders, with a stillness that she recognized the way you recognize an accent from home. He held himself like someone who had spent a long time in places where moving wrong could get you killed. She stopped at 6 feet, not because she was afraid, or not only because she was afraid, but because 6 feet was information distance. You could see faces at 6 feet. You could read hands. Ms. Holloway, the man said, not a question. Depends on who's asking. My name is Warren Dix. I'm a retired Master Sergeant, U.S. Army Special Forces. These men served with me. He didn't gesture to the others. He didn't need to. We've been looking for you for about 4 months. People who've been looking for me for 4 months usually lead with a phone call. We didn't have a number. We had a name on a medical record that was partially redacted and a first sergeant who remembered your face. He paused. It took a while. Megan's keys were still in her hand. She turned them slightly so the longest key sat between her first and middle finger, which was a thing she did sometimes without meaning to. What do you want? Warren Dix reached into his jacket, slowly, deliberately, the way you moved when you wanted someone to see your hands, and produced a folded piece of paper. He held it out. She didn't take it. In February of 2019, he said, a 4-vehicle convoy was hit by an IED on a supply route approximately 60 kilometers outside a forward operating base. 2 vehicles disabled, 7 casualties. The QRF had a 14-minute ETA. The medical officer on scene was a first lieutenant who took shrapnel to the face in the initial blast. The only trained medical personnel still functional was a 23-year-old nurse attached to the support element who held the casualty collection point together for 11 minutes until the QRF arrived. He stopped. One of those casualties was not expected to survive transport. He survived. The parking lot light pulsed twice, 3 times. Megan's mouth had gone dry. She knew exactly what date he was describing. She knew the grid. She knew the smell of that road, the sound the second vehicle made when it stopped burning. She knew the name of the first lieutenant who took the shrapnel, Abramson. She'd sent him a card when he got his medical discharge. And she knew the name of every man she'd worked on that night, including the one who shouldn't have made it. That was a classified operation, she said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. It was. My records from that attachment are sealed. They are. So how? The man who survived, Warren said. He told us. He told anyone who would listen for about 6 years until he got sick and stopped being able to talk about much of anything. His jaw worked for a moment. His name is Ryan Mercer. He's a captain, retired. He has a wife and 2 daughters, and he is currently in the oncology unit at a hospital in Seattle, running out of options. The keys fell before she knew she'd dropped them. They hit the asphalt with a small flat sound that was very loud in the empty lot. She had watched Ryan Mercer code twice on a stretcher in the back of an armored vehicle that smelled like burned rubber and copper. She had shocked him twice and gotten 2 sinus rhythms that she hadn't believed in until she believed in them. She had handed him off to the QRF surgeon with the report of what she'd done delivered in the flat-clipped language she'd been trained to use because the flat-clipped language was what kept you functional. She had never seen him again. She had been told, 4 months after the incident, in a brief administrative notification that said almost nothing, that he had not survived complications in recovery. She had believed it. She had carried it. She had built the small, quiet life around it in some ways she'd understood, and some she hadn't. He's alive, she said. He's alive, Warren confirmed. He was alive when they told you otherwise. There were reasons for that. I can't speak to all of them. What I can tell you... He stopped, started again. What I can tell you is that he built something after he got out. He runs an organization that works with disabled veterans on employment placement. He's got 43 people on staff. He's placed over 800 veterans in the last 6 years. His voice didn't change, but something in his face did. He matters. He matters to a lot of people, and not just us. Megan bent down and picked up her keys. Her hand was not entirely steady. She straightened. You said he's out of options. Leukemia, aggressive variant. He's been through 2 rounds of treatment. There's a matched donor database search that's been running for 8 months. Warren paused. No match found. She understood then. She understood before he said the next part, the same way she'd always understood things a half second before the situation confirmed them, which had been useful in a burning vehicle and was not particularly comfortable in a parking lot. The medical team found a partial match in a sealed military record, Warren said. An individual with a genetic marker profile that's compatible in a way they haven't seen in any other candidate. The record was from a medical attachment in 2019. It took us 4 months to find the person. Me. You. She stood there in the flickering light. Behind her, the hospital hummed with the sounds of a night shift. Somewhere a monitor alarmed and was silenced. A PA system made an announcement too muffled to make out. The ordinary world, carrying on. I thought he was dead, she said. I know. For 3 years, She stopped. I thought he was dead. I know that too. She looked at him. She looked at all of them, one at a time. The men standing at their careful intervals in a parking lot in Oregon at 12-something in the morning, men who had clearly not done this because it was easy. You flew here? Yes. All 6 of you? Ryan has a lot of people who feel they owe him something, Warren said. We're a small portion. She turned and looked at her car for a moment. She thought about her apartment. She thought about the chair and the book and the houseplants that needed watering. She thought about the feeling she'd carried for 3 years, which wasn't grief exactly, more like an unresolved account, a column that never balanced. There's a lab that can run the compatibility test, Warren said. There's a technician waiting. Tonight? We didn't want to waste time. She almost laughed. It came out as something else. Where? There's a private clinic 20 minutes from here. We have a vehicle. She looked at the key in her hand. I'll follow in my car. He nodded. He didn't argue. She noticed that he'd read her correctly, understood that she needed to be in control of at least that much. She got in her car. She sat for a moment with her hands on the wheel before she started it. Ryan Mercer was alive. He had a wife, 2 daughters, a reason to keep going. And somewhere in her blood, in the biological specificity of who she happened to be, there might be something that could keep him going longer. She started the car and followed the SUV out of the lot. The clinic was a low building off a commercial road, the kind of place that did sports medicine during business hours, and apparently other things after midnight when you had the right contacts. A woman in scrubs met them at the side entrance. 50s, efficient, the kind of person who'd done difficult things in difficult conditions and settled into competence like a second skin. Megan Holloway, she said. Yes. Dr. Paula Reyes, I've been briefed on the situation. She stepped aside. Come in. The room they put her in was ordinary. Exam table, cabinets, the antiseptic smell that lived in every medical space. One of Warren's men waited outside the door, not in a threatening way, just present. The others had dispersed somewhere. Warren himself sat in a chair in the corner of the room with his arms resting on his knees, not talking, which she found she appreciated. Dr. Reyes drew blood with the practiced ease of someone for whom this was genuinely uncomplicated, 4 vials properly labeled. We'll have preliminary results in about 90 minutes, she said. Full compatibility profile will take longer. The detailed work goes to a lab in Portland, but we'll know enough to tell you whether you're in the right range. What does right range mean? It means we'd proceed with full typing. It means you'd likely be a viable candidate. And if I am? Reyes set the vials in a small cooler. Then we talk about what donation involves, what you're agreeing to, what the process looks like. She looked at Megan directly. You understand this is entirely your choice. What these gentlemen need from you right now is the blood draw. Everything after this is yours to decide. I understand. Reyes nodded. She closed the cooler and left the room. Warren hadn't moved from his chair. Megan sat on the edge of the exam table and looked at the bandage on the inside of her elbow. Tell me about him, she said. What he's like now. Warren was quiet for a moment. Stubborn, he said finally. He was stubborn when I met him, and he got more stubborn after. Something shifted in his expression that wasn't quite a smile. He refuses to talk about himself. You ask him about his work, he'll go for an hour. Ask him about the chest that took 3 surgeries to repair, he changes the subject. He always did that. You knew him? I knew him for about 11 minutes, she said. But some minutes are longer than others. Warren nodded slowly. He understood that. She could tell he understood it the same way she did, from experience rather than description. He talks about you, Warren said. Or he used to before he got too sick to talk much. He never knew your name. The record was sealed. He just called you the nurse. Said you were the only reason he was there to tell the story. Megan looked at her hands. They were steady now. They were usually steady when it mattered. It was the ordinary moments that sometimes gave her trouble. He has daughters, she said. Lily and Cora, 9 and 6. Warren pulled out his phone and turned it toward her. A photo. A man who looked like he'd once been large and solid but had been reduced by something, sitting in a hospital bed, but grinning, with a dark-haired girl on each side of him who were clearly competing for the best angle on the selfie. His wife's name is Danny. She's the one who pushed the medical team to keep looking when the database search came back empty. Megan looked at the photo for a long moment. Lily and Cora, 9 and 6. She handed the phone back. The 90 minutes passed the way time passes in medical settings when you're waiting for something that matters, unevenly, with pockets of stillness and then sudden activity. One of the operators, a younger man, mid-30s, who'd introduced himself only as Beck, brought coffee from somewhere. She didn't ask where. It was bad coffee, and she drank it gratefully. Warren's men rotated in and out of the room, brief appearances. Not hovering, just present. She got the sense that none of them had slept in a while. One of them, a man with a scar that ran from his left ear to his collarbone, sat against the wall with his eyes closed for about 15 minutes, and then opened them exactly when Dr. Reyes reappeared in the doorway. Ms. Holloway. Megan set down her coffee. Preliminary markers are consistent. Reyes held a tablet, numbers on the screen that Megan could read from where she sat. You're in range. We'll need the full profile to confirm, but based on what we're seeing, you are a viable candidate for further evaluation. The room was quiet. Outside the door, she could hear someone exhale. How long for the full profile? She said. Portland Lab. Rush processing. 36 hours. Megan stood up. She thought about Ryan Mercer in a hospital bed in Seattle. She thought about Lily and Cora, 9 and 6, competing for the best selfie angle. She thought about 11 minutes in a burning convoy, 2 shocks, a sinus rhythm she hadn't believed in until she believed in it. I need to be at work at 7, she said. Warren looked up. I'll call the Portland Lab myself. I've done blood work rush orders before. I know how to make it move. She looked at Reyes. Send me whatever release forms you need signed. I want this in their hands by morning. Ms. Holloway, you don't have to. I know I don't have to. She picked up her jacket from the hook on the back of the door. That's not the same thing as not doing it. She signed the forms. She called the lab herself. It was 2 a.m. and she got a night operator who was not thrilled. And she was patient and precise and did not let him off the phone until he had the courier pickup scheduled for 5 a.m. Warren's men were quiet through all of it, not interfering, not helping, just witness. When she finished, Beck handed her a card, a number handwritten on the back. That's a direct line to Ryan's care team in Seattle, Warren said. His oncologist expects your call. She took the card. She looked at it. The door opened before she put it away. The woman in the doorway was not Dr. Reyes. She was younger, wearing a lab coat that looked slightly too large, and she was holding a printed sheet with an expression that Megan couldn't immediately categorize. Not good news, not bad news. The face of someone who'd just seen a number that didn't fit the expected range. I'm sorry, the woman said. I'm Tara. I'm the technician. I shouldn't interrupt, but... She stopped. She looked at Megan. This isn't a preliminary compatibility. This is closer to a full typing. I ran an extended panel because the initial markers were so... She shook her head. I've been doing this for 7 years. Warren stood up. What does it say? Tara looked at the paper in her hand, then at Megan, then at the paper again. It's a perfect match, she said. Not viable candidate, not close range. I'm talking a full 10 out of 10 HLA match. She pressed her lips together. In 7 years, I've seen 2 of these. In the entire National Registry right now, there isn't another one. The room held completely still. Warren Dix, who had been in places where nothing was certain and nothing was clean, and composure was the difference between success and catastrophe, put one hand over his mouth. The man with the scar on his neck turned and looked at the wall. Beck made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Megan looked at the paper. She looked at the numbers. She was a nurse. She knew what she was reading. Lily and Cora, she thought, 9 and 6. When can we proceed, she said. Tara blinked. The donation itself. There's a preparation protocol, medical clearance. You'd need to... I know the protocol, Megan said. I've seen it from the clinical side. I'm asking about timeline. If your full workup clears, 2 weeks, maybe 3. 2 weeks. Ryan Mercer had been in treatment for months. 2 weeks was nothing. 2 weeks was everything. She folded the card with the oncologist's number and put it in her jacket pocket. She looked at Warren, who was still standing with his hand not quite lowered from his face. I need to go home, she said. I need 4 hours of sleep before my shift. She picked up her bag. Tell Ryan's team I'll call at 9. She walked out through the clinic's side door. The night air hit her, cold, Oregon cold, pine-scented, real. She stood on the pavement and breathed it. Somewhere on a floor above her apartment, a neighbor's television was probably still on. Her houseplants needed water. She had a pediatric patient on the 4th floor of Redwood who was getting her first post-induction blood work results in the morning and was terrified. She walked to her car. She drove home in the dark, the city moving past her windows like something she was watching from a great distance. And she thought, he's alive. He built something. She got home. She watered the plants because it had been 2 days and they needed it. And she stood at the kitchen counter in the quiet and let herself feel whatever the feeling was, not happiness, not grief, something more complicated than either, the sensation of an account reopening after you'd long ago written it to 0. She set her alarm for 6. She did not sleep for a long time. And in the morning, when she did sleep, she dreamed of a vehicle on a dirt road, a man's pulse under her fingers. The moment it steadied, and for the first time in 3 years, the dream didn't end where it used to end. It kept going. Somewhere back at the clinic, Warren Dix was sitting in a chair with his elbows on his knees, looking at a piece of paper with numbers on it, and none of the men in the room with him were saying anything, and one of them, the one with the scar, had his eyes closed and his head back against the wall, and from the outside it might have looked like sleep. It wasn't sleep. It was something closer to the suspended moment before a lifeline holds. It wasn't sleep. It was something closer to the suspended moment before a lifeline holds. She called at 8:53, 7 minutes early, because she'd been awake since 5:30 and there was no point pretending otherwise. The oncologist's name was Dr. Soren Hale, and he answered on the second ring, which told her something about how he'd been spending his morning. His voice was professionally controlled in the way that people who deliver bad news for a living learn to control things. Flat effect, careful pacing. But underneath it, she could hear the thing that careful pacing never fully hid. He was tired. He had been tired for a while. "Ms. Holloway," he said. "I understand the preliminary results were perfect match," she said. "I've seen the numbers. You can talk to me like I have a medical background, because I do." A pause. She heard him recalibrate. "All right. Then you understand what we're looking at. Tell me his current status." Hale walked her through it in the direct way she'd asked for. Ryan's AML diagnosis 14 months ago, the first induction chemotherapy that achieved remission for 4 months before the relapse, the second round of treatment that had knocked the disease back but not out, the deteriorating marrow function that made a third round of conventional chemo increasingly dangerous. The bone marrow transplant had been identified as the best remaining path 6 months ago. The search had been running since then. "We've had 3 near matches," Hale said. "None cleared the full compatibility threshold. There's a protocol window. If we don't proceed within approximately 6 weeks, his marrow function will fall below the threshold where transplant is viable." He stopped. "Which means this is the window." 6 weeks? Optimistically, he's been holding, but... Another pause. "He's tired, Ms. Holloway, and Captain Mercer is not someone who admits to being tired easily." She was sitting at her kitchen table with her second coffee cooling in front of her. Through the window, the Ashford morning was doing its ordinary thing, gray, overcast, a crow working at something on the telephone wire across the street. She watched it. "What do you need from me?" she said. Hale laid it out. Medical clearance workup, comprehensive blood work, cardiac screen, pulmonary function test. The pre-donation protocol if clearance passed. The procedure itself. Filgrastim injections to stimulate marrow production, followed by peripheral blood stem cell collection over 1 to 2 days. Possible side effects, bone pain, fatigue, the kind of symptoms that were genuinely unpleasant, but were not, in medical terms, dangerous for a healthy donor. "Timeline from today," she said. "Best case. Clearance workup takes 3 to 5 days if we expedite. Assuming you clear, the stimulation protocol is 4 to 5 days. Collection, 1 or 2 days. We could be looking at transplant in 3 weeks if everything moves." 3 weeks. She did the math against his 6-week window and felt the margin close up. "Schedule the workup," she said. "I'll call HR this morning about leave." "Ms. Holloway." He seemed to hesitate, which was interesting because he hadn't hesitated at anything clinical. "I want to be clear that you're not obligated." "Dr. Hale." She set down her coffee. I held his pulse in my hands on a dirt road in 2019 and got it back. I'm not going to lose it on paperwork. Schedule the workup. He scheduled the workup. She called HR at 8:59, which was 60 seconds after they opened, and was informed by a coordinator named Patricia that medical leave requests of the type she was describing needed to be routed to the department director first, and then to the hospital's HR system, and typically took 7 to 10 business days to process. Megan explained that she was a potential bone marrow donor for a critically ill patient, and the window was time-sensitive. Patricia said that was very admirable, and the process was still 7 to 10 business days. Megan thanked her and hung up and then called the charge nurse on her floor, Denise Kagawa, who had been running pediatric oncology for 11 years and had seen most things. Bone marrow donor situation, Megan said. I need to put in for leave and HR is giving me the timeline speech. How soon do you need it? Week and a half, maybe 2 weeks. Denise was quiet for a moment. You're talking to Aldridge. That's what I was thinking. He's not going to love it. No. But he'll do it if you frame it right. You want me to set up the meeting or you want to just walk in? I'll walk in, Megan said. Walking in usually works better with him. Doctor. Philip Aldridge was the chief of pediatric services at Redwood, which meant he managed the clinical staff across 3 floors and had opinions about everything from scheduling to IV protocol to the font used on the unit's patient information sheets. He was meticulous and territorial and genuinely excellent at his job, and Megan's relationship with him was functional but not warm. He thought she was too independent. She thought he needed to know less about everything. They had arrived at a working détente over 2.5 years that mostly held as long as neither of them pushed it. She walked into his office at 10:15. He was on the phone, but he looked up and held up one finger. Wait, which she did, standing in the doorway rather than sitting down, because standing communicated urgency and sitting down communicated. She was there for a long conversation. He wrapped up the call faster than he might have otherwise. Holloway, do you have an appointment? No, I have a situation that's time-sensitive and I need 10 minutes. He looked at her over his reading glasses. Sit down. She sat and told him the relevant facts in the order they were relevant. Potential bone marrow match, critically ill patient, 6-week window, 3-week procedure timeline, the need for expedited leave approval. Aldridge was quiet through it. He folded his hands on the desk, which was something he did when he was processing rather than responding. This is a former military patient, he said finally. Yes. And your connection to him is from your Army service? Yes. He was quiet again. She watched him weigh it, the scheduling disruption, the staffing implications, the institutional optics of blocking a bone marrow donation, the fact that he'd have to eat his 7 to 10 day process. She could see the calculus moving. I'll call Patricia in HR directly, he said. You'll have approval by end of day. Thank you. She stood to go. He said, Holloway. She turned. I didn't know you served, he said. It didn't come up. She walked out. She could feel him watching after her, but she didn't look back, because looking back invited conversation, and she had more calls to make. Warren Dix had given her a secondary number along with Hale's. She called it at noon from the hospital cafeteria, where the lunch crowd was loud enough to give her cover. He picked up on the first ring. Holloway. Workup scheduled for Thursday in Portland. Aldridge cleared the leave. She paused. How's Ryan? The pause on his end was half a second too long. He had a rough night. His temperature spiked. They got it down by morning. Infection? They're saying precautionary antibiotics. His team isn't alarmed. He didn't sound entirely convinced. He knows I'm in the picture? Danny told him this morning. Another pause. He cried. I thought you should know that. Ryan Mercer has not cried in front of another person in the 11 years I've known him, and he cried when Danny told him. She sat with that for a moment. Around her the cafeteria moved, trays, voices, the institutional smell of overcooked food and floor cleaner. Ordinary. He wants to talk to you, Warren said. When you're ready. No pressure on timeline. Saturday, she said. After my shift, set it up. She ate half a sandwich she didn't taste and went back upstairs. The rest of the week moved with the particular friction of things that should be simple being complicated. The medical clearance workup required her to drive to Portland on Thursday, which required her to swap her Friday shift, which required Denise to rearrange two people's schedules, which neither of them was happy about, which Megan absorbed because there was no version of this that didn't involve some collateral inconvenience. She drove to Portland on Thursday morning. She spent 4 hours in a clinical workup center that doctor. Hale's team had arranged, doing things she mostly knew how to interpret: blood panels, cardiac echo, pulmonary function. The technician running her spirometry kept apologizing for the machine, which was making an intermittent clicking sound. "It's fine," Megan said. "Just run it." She drove back to Ashford in light rain with the radio off, thinking about the filgrastim protocol, about the side effects she'd explained to patients' parents dozens of times, and now would experience from the other side, about what to pack if she went to Seattle for the collection. She called her mother on Sunday instead of Saturday, because Saturday was the call with Ryan, and she didn't trust herself to sound normal right after. "You sound tired," her mother said. "Work stuff." "You always say work stuff." "Because it's usually work stuff." "Megan." Her mother had a tone that was specific to mothers, a particular frequency of concern that cut through deflection. "Are you all right?" She thought about how to answer. "I'm doing something that matters," she said. "That's about as all right as I know how to be." Her mother accepted this in the way she'd learned to accept Megan's answers over the years. Not satisfied, but not pushing. They talked for 20 minutes about other things: her brother's new job, the dog who'd eaten something he shouldn't have, the garden coming back in spring. After she hung up, she sat in her chair for a while and let herself be nervous, because the call with Ryan was in 40 minutes, and she hadn't worked out what to say, and maybe there wasn't anything to say, but she didn't know that yet. Warren had set it up as a video call through a secure platform she'd had to download and verify with a code texted from a number she didn't recognize. She opened her laptop and stared at the waiting room screen with its little animated icon. At exactly 7, the screen resolved. The man in the hospital bed was recognizable and unrecognizable at once. She'd spent 11 minutes with him in the worst possible conditions, in low light, with blood and adrenaline and a 2-second decision tree running the whole time. She'd memorized his face in the way you memorize faces when you're deciding whether to keep fighting for them. Not aesthetically, but specifically, cataloging responsiveness and color, and the set of the jaw that told you whether someone was going to stay in the room with you. That face she knew. This face was the same structure, thinner, reduced by months of illness in the way illness reduces people, and it was turned toward the camera with an expression she needed a moment to categorize. He looked at her like she was something he hadn't fully believed was real until right now. "Megan," he said. His voice was lower than she'd expected, rougher. "Ryan." She hadn't planned on first names, but it came out that way. He tried to smile and got about 3/4 of the way there. "You look exactly like I thought you would." "You don't," she said. "I mean..." She stopped. "You were unconscious for most of it. I probably built a version of you." "What was your version like?" "Bigger," she said honestly. "You seemed bigger." He actually laughed at that, a short, real sound that made something in his face come back a little. "I get that a lot lately." He shifted against the pillows. She could see the IV line taped to his left forearm, the slight, careful way he moved, protecting something. "I've been trying to figure out what to say to you for about 48 hours. Danny keeps telling me to just talk, but she has better emotional instincts than I do." "She's right," Megan said. "Just talk." "I owe you everything," he said. "That's the thing I keep getting stuck on. I know that's a big statement, but my kids are 9 and 6. I got to be there when they were born. I got to..." He stopped. He pressed his lips together and looked at the ceiling for a moment. "My wife and I have this ugly yellow kitchen that we keep saying we're going to repaint, and we've been saying it for 4 years. I need to live long enough to repaint that kitchen. That's what I keep thinking about." She hadn't expected that. She'd expected something more formal, or more emotional, or both. Not the ugly yellow kitchen. "I'll get you to the kitchen," she said. He looked at her. "You don't have to do this. You're the second person to tell me that in 4 days. I'm going to need everyone to stop saying it." Another almost smile. "Warren told me you said that." He glanced off screen for a moment, something she couldn't see. My daughters want to draw you a picture. Tell them I want it framed. This time the smile went all the way. She watched it happen and felt something unknot in her chest that had been tight for 3 years. A thing she'd stopped noticing, the way you stop noticing a low-grade constant noise. She drove to Seattle the following Monday. She'd told almost no one. Denise knew, Aldridge knew in the minimal way she'd needed him to, and Warren's men had handled the logistics with a thoroughness that was slightly startling, the hotel reservation and the transport from the collection center back if she needed it. The apartment was left to someone else, her downstairs neighbor Priya, who had a spare key for emergencies and would check the plants. The collection center was connected to the hospital where Ryan was being treated, a large academic medical center that moved with the organized purposefulness of a well-resourced institution. She checked in and was processed with a clinical efficiency she appreciated. A nurse whose name tag read Obina walked her through the pre-procedure checklist. Any bone pain since starting the Filgrastim stim? Lower back? Normal range. Fatigue? Some. He made notes. First collection is approximately 4 hours. We'll assess yield and determine if a second session is needed. He looked up from the clipboard. How are you feeling otherwise? Like I want to get started, she said. He nodded once, the nod of someone who'd heard that particular answer before from people who meant it. The procedure itself was not dramatic. This was the thing nobody who'd heard about bone marrow donation abstractly expected. It was tedious, not cinematic. She lay back in a reclining chair with an apheresis line in each arm and watched blood cycle out, pass through the machine that separated the stem cells, cycle back. Obina checked her vitals every 30 minutes. There was a television mounted on the wall that she ignored. She spent most of the 4 hours looking at the ceiling and thinking about her patients on the 4th floor, about whether the Morales kids' neutrophil count had come back yet, about whether Denise had remembered to flag the Nakamura family for the social worker. She ate a sandwich at the end of the first session. She let Obina run the yield numbers. He came back with his clipboard and the look she'd learned to read in people who'd gotten a result they hadn't expected. Second session is going to be shorter than we projected, he said. Your yield is excellent. How excellent? More than sufficient for transplant. He paused. It's a strong collection. She finished the second session the next afternoon. She felt by the end of it the specific exhaustion of having given something actual, not sickness, not breakdown, just the body reporting that something had been removed and it was aware of the absence. She ate 2 granola bars in the car and drank water and sat still for a while before she drove to the hotel. Warren met her in the lobby. She hadn't expected him, but she wasn't surprised. You should have gone home, she said. Probably. He didn't explain further. He looked at her the way you look at someone you've been waiting on, and they've come through. How do you feel? Tired. Fine. She shifted her bag on her shoulder. Is the transplant scheduled? Tomorrow afternoon. He said it carefully, like the word was weight-bearing. She nodded. She wasn't going to be there for the transplant. That wasn't how this worked. The donor and recipient were in separate spaces, separate procedures. She'd given what she had to give. The rest was Ryan's body and Ryan's medical team, and the particular biological improbability of what she carried that happened to fit what he needed. Go home, Warren. I will. Tonight. Tomorrow, he said. She didn't push it. She took the elevator up to her room and she stood at the window and looked at the Seattle skyline going gray into evening, and she thought about Ryan Mercer in a room somewhere in this same building and his daughter's drawings that were apparently being prepared for her, and the ugly yellow kitchen they'd been meaning to repaint. She didn't know yet that when she got back to Ashford the next morning, something would be waiting for her that had nothing to do with Ryan Mercer. She didn't know that while she'd been in Seattle, a conversation had happened at Redwood Children's Medical Center, a conversation between Dr. Philip Aldridge and the hospital's new administrative director, a woman named Sylvia Crow, who had been in her position for 11 days and had arrived with a restructuring mandate and a list of names. Megan's name was on the list. She found out about it the way people find out about things they're not supposed to know yet, indirectly, from someone who looked at her wrong when she walked back onto the floor. Denise was in the medication room when Megan pushed through at 7 the next morning, and Denise had a face that was doing something complicated. Morning, Megan said. Morning. Too careful. Megan stopped. What? Denise set down the chart she was holding. Crow wants a meeting with you, today, 2 o'clock. What kind of meeting? Denise looked at her steadily. There was something in it, not pity, which Megan wouldn't have tolerated, but the specific, honest look of someone who wasn't going to soften a thing that couldn't be softened. Restructuring meeting, she's calling it. She's been through 2 of them already this week. Garrison got his hours cut in half. The first one she met with, Kim, from Respiratory, they offered her a position in Medford. Megan stood still. She's clearing out the floor. I don't know what she's doing, Denise said, but she's been asking about personnel files for a week, and Aldridge has been walking around looking like someone's been taking his blood pressure every 20 minutes. 2 o'clock, Megan thought. She'd been back on the floor for 3 hours after 2 days of driving to Seattle and giving bone marrow and running on not enough sleep, and there was a 2 o'clock meeting with an administrative director she'd never met. Okay, she said. Megan, I have patients to see. She picked up the handoff report from the rack. I'll deal with 2 o'clock at 2 o'clock. She worked the morning with her head down. The Morales kids' neutrophils were up, which was good. The Nakamura family had been seen by social work, which was also good. A 7-year-old named Preston, who'd been admitted 2 days ago with a fever of unknown origin in the context of his ongoing ALL treatment, needed the kind of sustained reassurance that was different from clinical intervention. He was scared, and his parents were more scared, and the fear was going to make the fever worse, which was its own feedback loop. She spent 40 minutes with them that weren't on any chart anywhere. At 1:45, she washed her hands, took off her gloves, and walked to the administrative wing. Sylvia Crow's office was on the 2nd floor in a space that had until 3 weeks ago been a conference room. She'd had it converted quickly. New desk, name placard already mounted, the deliberate aesthetic of someone who wanted you to register that she was here and she was staying. She was about 50, with the kind of precise grooming that was its own form of armor. And she looked at Megan the way Megan had been looked at before in her life, as a category first, a person second. Ms. Holloway. She gestured to the chair across the desk. Sit down. Megan sat. I'll be direct, Crow said, which people who weren't usually direct always said before they were indirect. I've been reviewing staffing allocations across the clinical floors. As part of the restructuring process, we're evaluating positions based on tenure, performance metrics, and departmental redundancy. All right, Megan said. Your position is one of several being evaluated. Crow folded her hands. You've been on the floor for 2.5 years. Your clinical metrics are adequate. However, you've had an unauthorized direct pharmacy contact incident in your file, and you've just taken an unscheduled absence of 3 days. The absence was approved by Dr. Aldridge. Dr. Aldridge approved a leave request that hadn't gone through HR review. He's the department director. He approved it outside of process, Crow said. I've spoken with HR about the proper protocol. Megan looked at her. She kept her face neutral in the way she'd learned to keep it neutral in situations where neutral was the only correct answer. What are you telling me, Ms. Crow? Crow opened a folder. We're offering a position restructuring. Your role would shift to a per diem classification. 30 hours maximum per period, no benefits continuation. She slid a paper across the desk. The alternative, if you don't accept the restructuring, is the separation package. The room was very quiet. 30 hours, no benefits. She knew what that meant, practically. She'd been paying for health insurance through the hospital's plan, and her rent was calibrated against a full-time salary, and per diem classifications at this hospital meant you were on the lowest priority list for shift assignments, which meant in practice you worked when nothing else was working, and you made 60% of what you'd made before if you were lucky. It was a managed exit. It was dressed up in HR language, but it was a door held open just far enough to call it voluntary. When do you need an answer? She said. End of business Friday. Megan picked up the paper. She looked at it for a moment. She set it back down. I'll let you know, she said. She walked out of the office and down the corridor and took the stairs rather than the elevator because she needed the 4 flights to let the thing she was feeling settle into something manageable. She came out on the pediatric floor and stood for a moment at the window at the end of the hall, the one that looked out over the parking lot where, 4 days ago, this had all been different. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out. The text was from Warren. Transplant is done. Ryan's in recovery. Team says initial indicators are good. She read it twice. She looked at the parking lot. She thought about the piece of paper on Sylvia Crow's desk and what it meant and what she was going to do about it and how much of her answer was already decided. Then her phone buzzed again. Different number this time, one she didn't recognize. She answered. Ms. Holloway. The voice was formal, official, the cadence of someone who spent a lot of time on phone calls that mattered. My name is Colonel Diane Forsyth. I'm the Medical Operations Officer for the Western Army Health Command. I apologize for contacting you without advance notice. A beat. I've been made aware of your recent activities in connection with Captain Ryan Mercer. I'd like to speak with you about that, and about something else. Something that involves your service record. Megan's hand tightened on the phone. Your file, Colonel Forsyth said, has been under a classification review for the past 6 weeks. The review was initiated following Captain Mercer's communications with our office regarding the events of February 2019. Another pause. Ms. Holloway, I need to ask you, are you aware that you were recommended for a military decoration following that incident, and that the recommendation was suppressed? The question hung in the corridor air the way bad news always does, not loud, just present, taking up more space than it should. Megan turned to face the window. The parking lot below was ordinary. A woman loading a stroller into a minivan. A maintenance worker with a cart of cleaning supplies. The regular world, indifferent. No, she said, I was not aware of that. Colonel Forsyth's response came without pause, the practiced steadiness of someone who'd been holding this information carefully. The recommendation was filed by your commanding officer at the time, Major Lewis Derrick, within 30 days of the February 2019 incident. It was routed through the Special Operations Support Command and flagged for classification review given the nature of the attachment. At some point in that review process, it was a brief stop. It was administratively closed without action. Closed, Megan repeated, without notification to you or to Major Derrick. She kept her voice even. Why are you telling me now? Because Captain Mercer spent the better part of 6 months before he became too ill to make calls contacting our office. He submitted a formal request for record review. He was... Forsyth paused, and there was something in the pause that wasn't purely official. He was persistent and detailed. He documented the incident from his recollection with a specificity that was difficult to dismiss. She stopped again. The review was initiated. What we found in the file is not something I can discuss fully over an unsecured line, but I want you to know it's been escalated, and I need to meet with you in person. When? I can be in Ashford by Thursday. Megan looked at her reflection in the window. She looked like someone who hadn't slept enough, which was accurate, and someone who was processing more than one thing simultaneously, which was also accurate. Thursday is fine, she said. She hung up and stood there another moment. Down the hall, the pediatric ward made its ordinary sounds. A small voice asking something, a monitor cycling, a door opening and releasing the brief controlled smell of antiseptic. Her floor, her patients. Sylvia Crow's paper was still on a desk 2 floors down. She pushed off the window and went back to work. She didn't tell anyone about the call. Not Denise, who asked twice over the course of the afternoon whether she was all right with a frequency that communicated she already suspected she wasn't. Not Warren, who sent a second text at 4 o'clock with Ryan's updated vitals. Stable, improving, early engraftment indicators that Hale was cautiously pleased about. She texted back a single acknowledgement and kept her head down through the end of the shift. At 6, she sat in her car in the parking lot and wrote herself 3 notes in the small notebook she kept in her bag for clinical observations she needed to remember. The first was Forsyth's name and rank. The second was the phrase administrative closure without notification, because she wanted it written down in her own words before she started processing what it meant. The third was the question she hadn't asked on the phone because she'd needed time to form it correctly. Who made the decision and why? She drove home. She ate something she didn't remember later. She slept badly for 7 hours and woke up at 4:30 with her mind already moving. Thursday came with low clouds and the smell of rain that hadn't arrived yet. Colonel Forsyth turned out to be a compact woman in her early 50s who drove herself from the Portland field office in a government sedan and met Megan at a coffee shop 3 blocks from the hospital because Megan had suggested it. Neutral ground, public, not the hospital where, whatever this conversation was, would travel at the speed of institutional gossip. Forsyth was in civilian clothes. She ordered black coffee, which Megan noted, and set a folder on the table without opening it immediately. I want to start by being clear about my position, Forsyth said. I'm not here to manage you or to contain this. I'm here because what I found in your file is a problem, and I think you deserve to hear it directly from someone with actual authority, not from a records clerk. All right, Megan said. Forsyth opened the folder. She turned 3 pages toward Megan, printed documents, the particular beige of aged photocopies, with redaction marks in several places, but not the ones that mattered. The first was Major Derrick's recommendation. Megan recognized his signature. She'd worked with him for 14 months, and she knew his handwriting, the way it got slightly compressed when he was writing quickly. He'd filed this within 3 weeks of the incident, not 30 days. Forsyth had said 30, but the date on the document was 22 days out, which meant he'd done it fast. Done it while it was still sharp. The recommendation cited specific actions. The clinical decision she'd made in 11 minutes. The 2 cardioversions. The blood product management she'd improvised with what was available. The field tourniquet application on the second casualty she'd gotten to after Ryan was stabilized. A detail she hadn't thought about in a long time because she'd had to compress the memory to keep it functional. Derrick had noted all of it. He'd also noted the conditions: darkness, active threat environment, limited supplies, no physician on scene. He'd recommended a commendation medal with Combat 5 device. The second document was the routing record. She could see where it had moved through the administrative chain: intake, classification review hold, secondary review assignment. And then a notation in a different hand, different ink, that said simply, "File suspended per Directive 7C. Recommend no further action pending command guidance." There was no signature on the notation. Just initials, RK. "We don't know who RK is," she said. "We have a candidate," Forsyth said carefully. The Directive 7C referenced relates to a policy that was in place at the time for limiting documentation associated with the specific operational unit you were attached to. The intent of the policy was to prevent confirmation of that unit's presence in theater. She stopped. The policy did not authorize suppression of personnel commendation records. It was applied here incorrectly, whether through error or intentional misuse is what the current review is determining. Megan set the page down. She looked at it. 22 days after the worst night of her life, Louis Derrick had written 6 paragraphs about what she'd done in the dark on a dirt road. And those 6 paragraphs had sat in a file for 6 years while she separated from service and moved to Oregon and built the small perimeter life and worked pediatric oncology and told herself that what she'd done had mattered even without anyone saying so. "What does the review determine?" she said. "Practically. If the suppression was policy misapplication rather than intentional misconduct, the recommendation would be reinstated and processed. You would receive the decoration retroactively." Forsyth's voice remained level, but something in her eyes was not. If the review finds intentional suppression, it goes to the Inspector General's office and potentially further. Timeline. The review is currently at the IG preliminary stage. That usually takes Ms. Crow at Redwood is offering me a separation package by end of business Friday, Megan said. Forsyth stopped. "She's restructuring the floor," Megan said. "My position becomes per diem, or I take a package." Forsyth looked at her steadily. "Is there any indication she's aware of the record review?" "I don't see how she would be." "Then it's likely coincidental." "I know it's coincidental," Megan said. "I'm telling you about it because it's my current situation, and I need to decide what to do about it before I can focus on anything else." She picked up her coffee. "I haven't decided yet." Forsyth was quiet for a moment, then, "I want to tell you something off the record." "All right." Captain Mercer's communication to our office, the formal request he submitted, it wasn't only about the record review. He included a statement. Forsyth reached into the folder and produced one more page. This one wasn't a military document. It was a letter, typed, on plain paper. "He gave permission for me to share this with you." She set it on the table. Megan didn't pick it up immediately. She looked at it. 2 paragraphs. A signature at the bottom that she recognized from the video call 2 weeks ago. The careful, deliberate script of someone whose hands weren't entirely steady anymore. She read it. Ryan had written in the plain, direct language of someone who was a soldier and not a writer, and had no patience for flourish. that he had spent 6 years trying to find the nurse who kept him alive long enough to have a life, that he had contacted the Army's medical records office 4 times before anyone responded, that he understood classification requirements and wasn't asking for anything to be declassified, only for a record to be corrected, that the woman who made the decision to keep working on him when most people in her position would have moved to the next casualty, that her name was in a file somewhere with a recommendation that had never been acted on, and that was wrong, and the Army should fix it. The last sentence was short. She saved my life in the field, and she deserves to know it was recognized. Megan set the letter down. The coffee shop moved around her, a barista calling a name, 2 people at the next table looking at a laptop, rain finally hitting the window in small, distinct drops. "Thank you," she said. Her voice came out closer to normal than she'd expected. Forsyth nodded. She gathered her pages back. "I'll be in contact as the review progresses. And Miss Holloway," she closed the folder. "What you do about Friday is your business. But for what it's worth, I've read Derek's recommendation in full. You were 23 years old." Megan drove back to the hospital. She parked in the 3rd row under the flickering light that still hadn't been repaired and sat for a moment with the engine off. She thought about what 23 had felt like. Not in a sentimental way, more like consulting a record. She'd been 23, and she'd been scared most of the time and competent most of the time, and those 2 things had coexisted without canceling each other out, which was the only way it worked in that environment. She'd done what she'd been trained to do and a few things she'd improvised on instinct, and it had been enough on that particular night to make a difference that propagated forward 6 years into 2 daughters named Lily and Cora and an ugly yellow kitchen that still needed repainting. And then the record had been put in a drawer and she'd been told Ryan was dead, and she'd separated from service and moved to Oregon, and no one had ever said anything. She was 31 now, and she was about to lose her job, and a colonel had driven from Portland to show her paperwork. And somewhere in a hospital in Seattle, a man was in recovery running on stem cells she'd spent 2 days producing. She got out of the car. She went upstairs. She changed into her scrubs. She worked the afternoon shift and the evening shift because Denise needed coverage, and she had nothing else to do with the feeling that was moving through her, which was not grief and not anger precisely, but something that sat underneath both of those, something older and quieter and harder to name. Friday morning, at 7:15, she walked into Sylvia Crow's office without knocking. Crow looked up from her desk with the expression of someone who'd been expecting a knock. "I have an answer," Megan said. "I asked for end of business." "I'm declining both options," Megan said. "I'm not taking the per diem restructuring, and I'm not taking the separation package." Crow set down her pen. Her face did something that wasn't surprise exactly, more like recalculation. "Ms. Holloway, those are the options available. If you decline, then we go to an employment review, which I'm requesting in writing today." Megan set a single folded page on the desk. She'd printed it that morning at 6 a.m. before her shift started. "I've documented the timeline of my leave approval, including Dr. Aldridge's authorization and the reason for the absence. I've also documented the pharmacy contact incident, including the context, the patient outcome, and the attending's corrected order that followed." She kept her voice flat and her hands still. "I've been on this floor for 2.5 years. My patient outcomes are in the top quartile for this unit. I haven't missed a mandatory training. And the leave I took was medically necessary and approved by my direct superior." Crow picked up the page. She read it. Her expression was controlled, but something was working behind it. "If HR conducts a fair review," Megan said, "I'll stand on my record. If the review isn't fair, that's a different conversation." "Are you threatening?" "I'm not threatening anything." Megan looked at her directly. "I'm telling you what I'm doing. I'm requesting a formal review. That's a standard employee right. I'd like confirmation that it's been received." There was a silence that lasted about 5 seconds, which felt longer. Crow's desk phone rang. She glanced at it. She looked at Megan. She picked it up. Megan watched her face as she listened. She saw it change, not dramatically, the way faces changed in movies, but in the small ways that real faces change when information arrives that rewrites something. The slight stillness around the eyes, the hand that didn't quite return the pen to the desk smoothly. "Yes," Crow said. "I understand. Yes." She hung up. She looked at Megan with an expression that Megan couldn't read fully, only partially, And what she could read was that whatever had just changed had changed something significant. That was the hospital's legal office, Crow said. They've received a communication this morning from the Western Army Health Command. Megan kept her face still. It references you by name, Crow said, and it requests that the hospital take no adverse employment action pending a records clarification process. The rain outside had picked up. Through the narrow office window, Megan could see it running down the glass. She hadn't known Forsyth was going to do that. She hadn't asked for it. She hadn't known the Army moved that fast, or in that particular direction. I'll wait for HR to contact me about the review, Megan said. She walked out. She made it to the stairwell before her legs told her she needed to stop for a second, which was new information about how the last 10 days had accumulated in her body. She put her hand on the railing and stood on the landing between the second and third floor and breathed. Her phone buzzed. Warren. Ryan's fever broke this morning. Hale says early engraftment confirmed. It's working. She read the message twice. Her hand was on the railing, the metal cold and specific and real. It's working. She was still standing there when her phone buzzed again. Different number, not Warren, not Forsyth. A number with a Seattle area code she didn't recognize. She answered. Megan? A woman's voice, steady, slightly hoarse in the way voices got hoarse when they'd been doing a lot of talking in hospital corridors. This is Danny Mercer. I'm sorry to call without warning. Warren gave me your number. It's all right, Megan said. Is he? He's better. He's actually better this morning. Hale said the word responding twice in one sentence, which I've learned to treat like a miracle. Danny's voice wavered slightly at the edges of the word and then steadied. I'm calling because... She stopped, started again. Ryan doesn't know I'm making this call. He'd tell me not to bother you, but I've been sitting in this hospital for 4 days trying to figure out how to say this. A breath. You gave us more time. That's what you did. And I needed you to know that a person who knows that said it out loud. Megan closed her eyes for a moment. The stairwell was cold and smelled like institutional cleaning product, and somewhere 2 floors up a child was crying in the specific frustrated way of children who'd been in the hospital too long. Tell Ryan to repaint the kitchen, she said. A surprise sound that was almost a laugh. He told you about the kitchen? He did. It's really aggressively yellow, Danny said. Like the previous owners had strong feelings. The good ones always do. Megan opened her eyes. Tell him I said get better faster. I want the before and after photos. After she hung up, she stood on the landing another moment. Then she climbed the stairs to the 4th floor, changed her gloves, and went to check on Preston, whose fever had broken overnight and who was sitting up in bed looking at a book about dinosaurs with the solemn focus of a 7-year-old processing serious information. She checked his chart. She checked his IV line. She asked him which dinosaur was the most dangerous and listened to a 4-minute explanation of why the answer was more complicated than most people realized. She left his room and nearly walked into Dr. Aldridge, who was standing in the corridor with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Not the careful professional affect of a man managing his department, something less managed than that. I heard from legal, he said. I know. I also heard from Crow. He looked at her. She didn't tell me she was going to that meeting with you. She didn't tell me either. He was quiet for a moment, hands in his coat pockets, looking at the middle distance. The Army Health Command contacted us on your behalf. I gathered. Megan. It was the first time he'd used her first name in 2.5 years. What exactly did you do over there? She looked at him. She thought about how to answer and decided on the only one that was true without being more than he needed. My job, she said. He looked at her for another moment, and she watched something shift in him. Not dramatically, nothing she could have named precisely, just the small recalibration of a person encountering information that changed what they thought they knew. She left him in the corridor and went to her next patient. She didn't know yet that by noon, 2 things would happen simultaneously. A sealed file in a military records office in Virginia would be flagged for expedited IG review, and a letter would arrive in Sylvia Crow's inbox from a name Megan had never heard. A name connected to the board of Redwood Children's Medical Center. A board member who had received a phone call the previous evening from a retired master sergeant who was not, it turned out, done making calls on Megan Holloway's behalf. She found out about neither of these things until later. What she found out first, at 11:47 in the morning, standing at the nurse's station reaching for a chart, was that Sylvia Crow was cleaning out her office. Denise was the one who told her, in the way Denise told her most things, directly, without preamble, walking up beside her at the nurse's station and saying it low enough that the ward clerk 2 feet away wouldn't catch it. Crow's office. Someone from the board showed up at 9 this morning. They were in there for 2 hours with the door closed. She came out and started making calls, and then about 40 minutes ago she started putting things in a box. Megan set down the chart she'd been reaching for. "Which board member?" she said. "Margaret Holt. She's been on the board for something like 12 years. I've seen her at the gala twice." Denise kept her voice level, but her eyes were doing something more complicated. She didn't look happy. With Crow? With the situation in general, she had the look of someone who'd been told something she wasn't supposed to have to deal with. Megan picked the chart back up. She made a note she needed to make. She thought about Warren Dix making phone calls from a waiting room in Seattle while his friend recovered in the unit upstairs, and she thought about what a retired master sergeant with 20-some years of service knew about how things actually got done, which was probably considerably more than Sylvia Crow had anticipated. "I haven't heard anything officially," she said. "You will," Denise said. She moved off down the corridor with the proprietary walk of someone who ran this floor and knew it and wasn't going to be disrupted by administrative weather. Megan spent the next 3 hours doing her job. This was not avoidance. It was the most functional thing available to her, and her patients didn't care about what was happening 2 floors down. Preston had questions about whether a Diplodocus could defeat a T-Rex in a swamp environment, which required serious engagement. The Morales family needed the attending's post-round notes interpreted in plain language. A new admission, a 4-year-old named Sophie with relapsed Wilms tumor, arrived at 2 in the afternoon and needed the particular careful attention of someone helping a very small person understand that she was back in a place she'd hoped not to return to, which meant Megan sat on the edge of her bed for 15 minutes and told her the truth in a way that was age-appropriate and honest, which was harder than it sounded. At 4:15, her pager went off. Not a patient code, an administrative page to Dr. Aldridge's office. She handed off to the evening nurse and took the stairs. Aldridge was behind his desk. Beside him, in a chair that she'd pulled slightly apart from the furniture arrangement in a way that communicated independence of authority, was Margaret Holt. 70s, white hair cut practically short, a suit that was expensive without being decorative. She had the look of someone who had been making consequential decisions for a long time and was not rattled by the process. "Ms. Holloway," Aldridge said, "please sit down." She sat. Holt spoke first. "I'll be direct. I received a call last night from a retired master sergeant named Warren Dix, who explained the circumstances of your recent medical leave and your relationship to Captain Mercer. He also described the employment situation you're currently facing." She folded her hands on her knee. "This morning I contacted 2 other board members and we requested an emergency conversation with Ms. Crow." "What happened in that conversation?" Megan said. "I asked her to walk me through the basis for the restructuring of your position." Holt's voice was measured but not warm. What she described was a process that was, at minimum, procedurally incomplete. The pharmacy incident she cited as a performance concern is documented in a way that omits the clinical outcome. The patient received the correct medication within the appropriate window because you escalated appropriately. The leave she characterized as unauthorized was approved in writing by the department director. She paused. She also was not aware, until this morning, that the Army Health Command had sent a communication to our legal office. "I wasn't aware of that either," Megan said, "until after the fact." "Colonel Forsyth was proactive," Holt said, and something in her tone suggested she appreciated that kind of proactive. "The board's position as of this afternoon is that the employment action against you is suspended pending a full HR review conducted by an external reviewer, not internal staff." Aldridge had been quiet through this. He spoke now. "I should have pushed back harder when Crow first raised your name. I knew the leave was properly authorized, and I let the process move without—" He stopped. He wasn't a man who apologized easily, and this wasn't quite an apology, but it was in that territory. "I should have said something sooner." Megan looked at him. "I know," she said, which was not generous but was true, and Aldridge accepted it with the small nod of a man who'd expected no better. The HR review will take approximately 2 weeks, Holt said. During that time, your position and benefits remain unchanged. You continue working your regular schedule. She looked at Megan directly. I also want to say, personally, what you did for Captain Mercer is not something this institution should be in the business of penalizing. Megan nodded. She stood. One more thing, Holt said. Ms. Crow submitted her resignation approximately 30 minutes ago, effective immediately. I want you to hear that from me, not from the corridor. Megan walked out of Aldridge's office and stood in the hallway for a moment, outside the door where no one could see her face, and let the things she felt move through her, not triumph, which would have been too clean, but something closer to the sensation of a weight being removed that you'd stop noticing you were carrying. She took the stairs back up to her floor. She didn't tell anyone what had happened in that office. Denise could read it in her face when she came back to the station and left it alone, which was the correct thing to do. The shift ended. She drove home in the early dark of an Oregon evening and heated soup she didn't really taste, and sat in her chair with the book she hadn't opened in 2 weeks. She opened it. She read 4 pages. She closed it and looked at the ceiling. The ceiling didn't offer anything, which was also fine. She called Warren at 9. Holt, she said when he answered. She's Ryan's aunt's college roommate, he said. I know how that sounds. I wasn't going to not use it. Megan pressed her lips together. The laugh that came out was small and involuntary, and she let it. You've been busy. I had a lot of time in a waiting room. How is he? Tired. Better kind of tired than before, according to Danny. He ate something today that wasn't liquid. A pause. His numbers are moving in the right direction. Hale said the word encouraging this afternoon, which from Hale is practically a standing ovation. She settled back in the chair. Outside, the pine tree on the corner was doing something slow in the wind. Warren, the HR review is 2 weeks. After that, I don't know what happens. The board suspended the action, but they didn't reverse it. Forsyth says the IG review has been fast-tracked. Her word was fast-tracked, not mine. He paused. She doesn't say things she doesn't mean. How do you know Forsyth? I don't. I know people who do. He said it simply, without elaboration, which was how people with his kind of background said most things. She thought about a file in Virginia with her name on it, about Major Derrick writing 6 paragraphs in 22 days and putting his signature on something that had then been put in a drawer. She thought about the initials RK on a suppression notation and the fact that nobody had found out who that was yet, at least not that Forsyth had told her. I want to know who RK is, she said. Yeah, Warren said. Me too. They didn't know yet. She slept on it and woke up not knowing, and went to work and came home and did it again. And the 2 weeks moved with the particular quality of time when you're waiting on 2 things simultaneously. One of them biological. One of them institutional. Both of them outside your direct control. Ryan's engraftment continued. Hale sent weekly updates that were relayed through Warren with the clinical sparseness of a good doctor who knew his audience, counts, trends, flags. By the end of the first week, the white cell count was moving in a direction that Hale called consistent with early engraftment success, which Danny translated in a separate text as he's fighting and it's working. By the end of the second week, Ryan was sitting up for longer stretches and had apparently won an argument with his care team about the television remote, which Warren relayed as evidence of his improving cognitive function. The HR review ran its course. The external reviewer, a woman from a Portland firm who introduced herself as Sandra Kwan, spent 3 days on site, interviewed 6 people including Megan and Aldridge, and 2 nurses who'd been on shift during the pharmacy incident, and reviewed the documentation with the thorough, unhurried manner of someone paid to be thorough and unbothered by institutional pressure. Her findings arrived on a Tuesday morning. Aldridge called Megan to his office to read them, which was his way of ensuring she heard it from him rather than from a system notification. The review found the pharmacy incident to be within the scope of appropriate clinical escalation. It found the leave approval to be properly authorized. It found no performance basis for the proposed restructuring of Megan's position. It recommended that her personnel file be cleared of the incident notation and that the restructuring action be withdrawn. It also included a supplementary finding, one that Kwan had apparently added without being asked, noting that the documentation of the original restructuring proposal showed evidence of selective record review, and that the clinical incident cited had been documented in a way that omitted context material to its evaluation. The finding didn't use the word misconduct. It used the phrase incomplete documentation practices and recommended that the hospital review the personnel files of the other employees affected by the same restructuring process. Garrison. Kim from respiratory. The others Denise had mentioned. Aldridge read that part twice. He looked at Megan over his reading glasses. "I'll take this to the board," he said. "You should," she said. She went back to work. The call from Forsyth came on a Thursday, 2.5 weeks after their coffee shop meeting. Megan was on her lunch break, sitting in the stairwell with the door propped because the break room was loud, eating a sandwich with actual appetite for the first time in a while. "We've identified RK," Forsyth said. Megan set down the sandwich. "His name is Robert Callum. He was a lieutenant colonel at the time of the 2019 incident, serving as the administrative officer for the Special Operations Support Command that managed your unit's attachment." Forsyth paused. "He is currently a retired colonel. He consults for 3 private defense contractors." Why did he suppress the recommendation? That's the question the IG has been putting to him since Monday. Her voice was precise and even. "What we know so far is that Directive 7C was intended to limit documentation of the unit's operational presence, not to extend to personnel actions. Callum appears to have applied it broadly, possibly to a number of records, not only yours. We're reviewing that now." Another pause. His explanation, offered through his attorney, is that the application was administrative error. "His attorney," Megan said. "He retained counsel 2 days after we made initial contact." She looked at the stairwell wall. Gray concrete, a fire safety notice, a smudge that had been there since she'd started using this stairwell 18 months ago. What happens to him? If the IG determines intentional suppression, it goes to the military justice system. He's retired but remains subject to UCMJ jurisdiction under specific conditions. If it's determined to be gross negligence, there are other consequences. His consulting contracts... Forsyth stopped. "Let me say this carefully. 2 of the 3 contractors he consults for have government security clearances. An IG finding of misconduct or gross negligence in a records suppression case would require a review of those clearances." Megan understood. Contractors with government clearances lived or died by those clearances. A review with a negative finding would end those consulting relationships. For a retired colonel in his 60s who'd built a second career on defense consulting, that was not an abstract consequence. "When will the IG finding come?" she said. 4 to 6 weeks on the current timeline." Forsyth hesitated, which was unusual for her. "Ms. Holloway, I want to make sure you understand, regardless of what the IG determines, your decoration recommendation is being processed. The IG finding affects Callum. Your recognition is not contingent on it." Megan was quiet for a moment. "How many other records did he apply it to?" A pause. "We've found 3 others so far. 2 are deceased. One is..." Another pause. "We're locating that individual." She closed her eyes for a moment. 3 others. 2 of them dead, which meant their families were somewhere with a similar gap in their understanding of what their person had done and been recognized for. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "I'll update you when the finding comes." Forsyth paused one more time, and when she spoke again, the official cadence had shifted slightly, just slightly. "Major Derrick, by the way. I contacted him as part of the review. He's 71, he's retired in Arizona. He remembered everything." She went back upstairs. She checked Preston's dinosaur book situation, which had evolved. He was now specifically focused on aquatic prehistoric reptiles, and had opinions about the plesiosaur that he needed to share. She listened for 10 minutes and asked 3 questions that made him feel like he was explaining to someone who didn't already know, which was the point. She got home at 6:30 and found, taped to her apartment door, an envelope with her name on it in the handwriting of a child. Inside was a drawing in crayon, a woman in scrubs with a red cross on her shirt standing next to what was recognizably a hospital building, and less recognizably 2 figures that she took to be the artist and a shorter companion. At the bottom, in the same crayon but a different hand, "Lily drew this for you. Cora says hi. Danny." She put it on the refrigerator. She stood there looking at it for longer than made sense, and then she moved on. The board meeting where Aldridge presented Kwan's supplementary finding happened on a Friday, 3 weeks after Crow's resignation. Megan wasn't in the meeting. She heard about it from Denise, who heard about it from Holt's assistant, who heard about it from someone whose exact position Denise didn't specify. The finding about incomplete documentation practices had been applied retroactively to the other 2 restructuring actions Crow had completed before resigning. Garrison's hours were restored. Kim was offered her full-time position back, or a severance package with the incorrect performance notation removed, whichever she preferred. Kim chose to come back. Garrison chose the same. Megan found out about both of these things in the way she found out about most things on the floor. Indirectly, piecemeal, assembled from the institutional grapevine that moved through a nursing ward like weather. What she didn't find out indirectly came from Warren on a Saturday morning, in a text with no preamble. Ryan's being moved out of transplant unit. General Ward, Hale says he's cleared the critical window. She read it standing in the cereal aisle of a grocery store at 8:45 in the morning, and she stood there long enough that a man trying to reach the granola behind her eventually said gently, "Excuse me." And she stepped aside and said, "Sorry," and put the cereal she'd been holding into her cart without looking at it. She'd thought she was done being surprised by the intensity of her own reaction to Ryan Mercer's survival. She'd thought the 2-week mark had prepared her. She was wrong, apparently. The relief hit her in the cereal aisle of a grocery store in Ashford, Oregon, and she did not cry, but it was a near thing, and she stood in front of the granola for another moment and let it move through her. She texted back, "Tell him to start planning the kitchen." Warren's response came in 30 seconds. He already has a color chip. She put her phone away and finished her grocery shopping with the particular lightness of someone who'd been carrying something heavy for a long time and was only now noticing what the absence felt like. The following Tuesday, Colonel Forsyth called again. She was at work, but it was a quiet moment. Sophie was sleeping, Preston was with his parents, the ward had a brief midday lull that happened sometimes without explanation. She took the call at the window at the end of the hall. "The IG preliminary finding came in early," Forsyth said. Megan gripped the phone. "The finding is intentional misuse, not administrative error." Forsyth's voice was careful and steady. Callum's application of Directive 7C to personnel commendation records is characterized in the preliminary finding as a deliberate overreach of his administrative authority. The language is willful suppression of commendation records in contravention of established personnel policy. What does that mean for him? The preliminary finding goes to the full IG review board for confirmation, which is typically procedural at this stage. Once confirmed, it triggers a review of his clearance-adjacent consulting contracts. The contractors have been informally notified. A pause. He resigned from 2 of the 3 this morning. The 3rd hasn't responded yet, but given the finding, their legal team will advise them to act. She watched a pigeon working at something on the window ledge outside. Military consequences? The UCMJ jurisdiction question is being reviewed by JAG. Given his age and retirement status, the most likely outcome is a formal censure rather than prosecution. But a censure at this level goes into his permanent military record and is publicly accessible. Public. The word landed specifically. So anyone who looks him up will find it. Yes. Forsyth was quiet for a moment. He spent 22 years building a career in which he was the person who managed classified information and could be trusted with it. That identity. She stopped. The finding undoes that. Megan thought about the initials RK in different ink in a drawer for 6 years. She thought about Major Derrick in Arizona, who remembered everything. She thought about the other 3 records that were being reviewed, the 2 people who were gone and couldn't receive anything, and the one who was being located. The full confirmation. When? She said. 3 weeks. Roughly. Forsyth paused. Your decoration processing is moving through official channels simultaneously and is not held by the IG timeline. I would expect formal paperwork within the month. She didn't know what to say to that, so she said, "Thank you." "You don't need to thank me," Forsyth said. "This should have happened in 2019. After she hung up, she went back to her patients. She spent the remainder of Tuesday and most of Wednesday in the ordinary work of her floor, which was not undramatic. It never was, in pediatric oncology, where ordinary days still held the particular weight of children who were sick and families who were scared and outcomes that were never certain. She didn't think about Callum or Forsyth or the IG timeline in any sustained way while she was working, because the work didn't allow for sustained distraction and she didn't want it to. This was the thing about the work that she hadn't been able to explain to people who weren't in it. It demanded your whole attention, and in demanding it, gave you something that was both a burden and a relief. On Wednesday afternoon, she got a call from Dr. Soren Hale. He never called her directly. He communicated through Warren. The fact that he was calling told her something before he said anything. Ms. Holloway, his voice was different from the first time she'd spoken to him, still controlled, still precise, but the fatigue she'd heard in it before was less prominent. I wanted to call you personally. Ryan's recovery is progressing beyond what I would characterize as typical for this stage. His engraftment markers are strong. His immune reconstitution is tracking ahead of schedule. A pause. I've been doing this for 19 years. I want to be careful about timelines because medicine doesn't respect them. But what I'm seeing... Another pause. I'm optimistic. Genuinely. Not cautiously optimistic. Optimistic. She sat down. She was in the medication room with the door closed, which was against protocol, but it was the only private space available, and she'd needed one. How long until we know? She said. Full assessment at the 6-month mark tells us what we need to know for long-term prognosis. But the window he had to clear, the critical transplant window, he's through it. Hale let the sentence finish without decoration. He's through it. She sat in the medication room for another minute after the call ended. The shelves around her were labeled and organized in Denise's particular system, a system that Megan had figured out in her first week and found, if she was honest, slightly more logical than the system she'd have designed herself. She thought about a 9-year-old girl who drew crayons with solemn commitment. She thought about a 6-year-old named Cora who said hi through her mother. She thought about Danny Mercer sitting in hospital corridors for 4 days and finding the language to say you gave us more time. She thought about Ryan's ugly yellow kitchen. She stood up. She put her phone back in her pocket. She pushed open the medication room door and went back onto the floor. The thing she didn't know yet, the thing that was about to change the shape of the next several weeks, was that Warren Dix had not stopped making calls after the Margaret Holt call. He'd made others. He'd spoken to a journalist at a Portland newspaper who covered veterans affairs. Not to pitch a story, but because the journalist had contacted him 2 years ago about Ryan's work with disabled veterans, and Warren trusted him, and he wanted someone in the civilian world to understand what had happened to a personnel file in 2019. He had done this without telling Megan, because he knew she wouldn't have asked for it, and he decided she didn't have to. The journalist's name was Cal Reeves. He'd been working the story quietly for 2 weeks by the time he called Redwood Children's Medical Center's main line on a Thursday morning, asking for a comment on a story he was planning to run about a local nurse's military service and a suppressed decoration recommendation. The call was routed to the hospital's PR office. Megan found out about it at 2 in the afternoon when the PR coordinator, a young man named Elliot, who was visibly not equipped for this particular situation, knocked on the pediatric ward door looking for her. "There's a reporter," he said. "He's asking about you and the Army and something about a medal. We don't have a protocol for this." Megan looked at him. "What paper?" "Portland Beacon. He says he's running the story tomorrow regardless." Elliot looked like he needed to sit down. "He's asking if you want to give a comment." She thought about it for approximately 4 seconds. "Tell him I'll call him back by 5, she said. "Give me his number." She called Warren first. Warren answered immediately, which meant he'd been waiting. "Cal Reeves," she said. A pause. "I trust him." "That's a statement about you, not about me." "Fair," he said. "But Megan, the story's already written. He's got the IG preliminary finding. He's got Forsyth's confirmation of the record review. He's got Ryan on record. Ryan agreed to be quoted." Another pause. "The only voice missing is yours." She stood at the window, the parking lot. The flickering light that had finally been repaired sometime in the last week she'd noticed. It held steady now. "Does Ryan know you did this?" she said. "He knows. He pushed for it, actually. He said..." Warren paused again. "He said if the Army wasn't going to tell the story publicly, someone else should." She pressed her phone against her ear and looked at the parking lot and thought about what it meant to let a story be told versus what it meant to tell it yourself, and whether the distinction mattered, and whether she was the kind of person who wanted to control that, or whether she was just the kind of person who wanted to be left alone, which was a different thing and not the same as right. The journalist's number was on the paper Elliot had given her. She looked at it. At 4:47, she called. Cal Reeves answered on the second ring, same as Hale had, same as Warren always did, the ring pattern of people who expected the call and weren't going to miss it. "Ms. Holloway," he said, "thank you for calling." "I have 13 minutes before my next patient check," she said. "Ask what you need to ask." He asked good questions. She gave him honest answers that were specific enough to be useful and short enough not to be quotable in ways she'd regret. She told him what she'd done on the road in February 2019 in the functional language of clinical description, not narrative. She told him that Captain Mercer had survived and built something she thought was worth surviving for. She told him she donated because it was possible to donate and that she expected anyone with the ability to do the same thing would make the same choice. He asked her how she felt about the suppressed commendation. She was quiet for a moment. "I feel like it should be corrected," she said, "which it is being. And I feel like the people who didn't get to see it corrected, because they're not here anymore, I feel that." He didn't push. He thanked her. She hung up at 4:59 and went to check on Sophie, who was awake and wanted to show her a drawing she'd made that was, she explained with some solemnity, a cat. It did not look like a cat. Megan told her it was excellent, which was true in the way that things made by 4-year-olds are excellent. She went home that night and ate dinner and went to bed at a reasonable hour and did not check news sites compulsively because there was nothing she could control about what the morning held, and she'd learned, more than once and in worse conditions than this, that you slept when you could. She woke up at 5:42. She made coffee. She opened her laptop. The story was on the Portland Beacon's website. It had run at midnight. Cal Reeves had titled it, "The Nurse Who Held the Line," and it began with Ryan Mercer's account of February 2019, told in his words, specific and unadorned. And it ended with a quote that Megan did not recognize from any moment in their one phone call and then understood. A moment Warren had described to Reeves, perhaps, or Forsyth, or Danny. The quote at the end of the article was attributed to Megan Holloway, but it wasn't one she'd said to Reeves. It was something she had said to Warren in a parking lot at 12-something in the morning, the night she first understood what was being asked of her. "I know I don't have to. That's not the same thing as not doing it." She closed the laptop. She finished her coffee. Her phone buzzed. Not Warren, not Forsyth, not Danny. A number she didn't recognize with an Ashford area code. She answered. "Miss Holloway," a woman's voice. Brisk, authoritative, slightly hesitant in a way that the briskness was clearly meant to cover. "My name is Dr. Anita Kowalski. I'm the Chief Medical Officer at Redwood Children's Medical Center." Megan put down her coffee cup. "I was appointed to the role 6 days ago," Kowalski said. "I've been reviewing the situation involving your employment, and—" she paused. "I've read the HR review, and I read the article this morning, and I've been on the phone with Margaret Holt for the last 40 minutes. Another pause. "I'd like to meet with you today if you're able. There are things I want to say in person." Megan looked at her kitchen wall, the crayon drawing of a nurse in a hospital, and 2 small figures held up by a refrigerator magnet in the shape of a bear. "What time?" she said. "Whenever works for you," Kowalski said. "I'll be here." The morning light was coming in at a low angle across the kitchen counter, the way it did in early fall when the sun hadn't made it all the way up the sky yet. It lit the drawing from the side and made it more vivid than it was. The red crayon of the scrub cross, the yellow crayon of the building, the 2 small figures at the bottom, Lily and Cora, 9 and 6. She had work in 2 hours. She had patience. She had a 4-year-old who thought her cat drawing was excellent, which it was. She wrote down the time for Kowalski's meeting and put the paper on the counter, and she stood there in the morning light thinking about how much had moved and shifted in the last month. Not cleanly, not in any direction she'd controlled, but in directions that felt, on this morning, in this kitchen, like the right ones. Her phone buzzed one more time. This time she knew the number. Warren. Portland Beacon article, 14,000 shares overnight. And below that, a second message, Ryan saw it. He says he wants to talk to you. His words, "Tell her she's not allowed to be humble about this one." She looked at it for a long moment. Then, for the second time in as many weeks, she laughed. Real, unguarded, the kind that arrived without invitation, and she didn't try to put it back. She put the phone face down on the counter and finished her coffee. Then she picked it up again and texted Warren back. "Tell him I'll call tonight." She showered, she dressed. She drove to work in the particular gray light of an Oregon fall morning that was not beautiful in any postcard sense, but was the specific light she'd woken up to for 3 years and had stopped noticing and was noticing now. The pine tree on the corner, the gas station with the hand-painted open sign, the hospital's north face catching the low sun at an angle that made it look, briefly, like something more than a building. She worked the morning. She was good at her job on ordinary days. On this day, she was better than ordinary, not because anything clinical had changed, but because something in her had settled. Some vibration that had been running at low frequency for 3 years had quieted. She couldn't have explained it to anyone in a way that would have made sense, but Denise noticed. Denise noticed everything. "You look different," Denise said at the station, mid-morning, not looking up from the chart she was annotating. "Different how?" "Like someone who slept." "I did sleep." "No." Denise looked up. "Different than that." She studied Megan for a moment with the diagnostic eye of someone who'd watched hundreds of people navigate hard things and knew the difference between someone moving through difficulty and someone coming out the other side of it. "The article." "I didn't write the article." "No," Denise said. "But it's true." Megan picked up the chart she'd come to retrieve. "I have a patient." "You always have a patient," Denise said, which was not criticism, just observation, and she went back to her own work. Dr. Kowalski's office was larger than Crow's had been, and she hadn't rearranged it yet. She'd been in the role 6 days, and the previous CMO's furniture arrangement was still in place, which gave the meeting a slightly provisional feeling that Megan found appropriate. Kowalski was 50-something, angular, with reading glasses she kept taking off and putting back on in a way that suggested a recent prescription change she hadn't fully adjusted to. She didn't offer pleasantries. Megan appreciated that. "I've read the full HR file," Kowalski said, "and the external review. And I spoke with Sandra Kwan yesterday." She folded her hands. "I want to be direct about what I found. The process that was applied to your position and to Garrison's and Kim's was not a legitimate restructuring. It was a targeted reduction using performance documentation that was selectively assembled." She looked at Megan steadily. "That's my professional assessment. I'm putting it in writing to the board today." "Thank you," Megan said. "I'm also recommending that your file be cleared of the pharmacy notation entirely. Not amended, cleared. Because the notation as written doesn't accurately represent what happened." She paused. "You escalated appropriately. The patient received the right medication. That should be in the file, and nothing else should." Megan nodded. Kowalski took her glasses off. "I also want to say something that isn't administrative." She seemed to be deciding how to phrase it. "I did my residency at a military hospital. I know what the support attachment roles looked like. I know what it meant to be the only trained person in a casualty situation." She put the glasses back on. "What you did in 2019 is documented in Major Derrick's recommendation. I read it last night." She stopped. "I don't know why it took 6 years for the right people to read it." "Neither do I," Megan said. "But I know that what you've been doing on this floor in the meantime." Kowalski looked at her in a way that was direct without being sentimental. "It's the same thing. Different context, same instinct." She picked up a pen, then set it down. "I'd like you to consider a role expansion when you're ready. Not immediately, when things have settled. Senior clinical lead for the oncology floor. It would mean more responsibility, more input on protocol, mentoring the newer nurses." She paused. "It would also mean more pay, which I mentioned because it's relevant." Megan looked at her. She thought about the last 3 years of keeping her head down and doing her job and making herself small enough not to be noticed. She thought about how she'd built that smallness deliberately, as protection, and what it had cost her that she hadn't fully accounted for. "Let me think about it," she said. "Take your time," Kowalski said. "I'm not going anywhere." The IG full confirmation came on a Wednesday, 26 days after the preliminary finding. Forsyth called her at 7 in the morning, which meant it was important enough not to wait for business hours. "Confirmed," Forsyth said. "Willful suppression. The review board found unanimously." She walked Megan through the specific language. The terms mattered in military administrative proceedings in ways that were arcane to civilians but clear to anyone who'd served. Willful, not negligent, not error. Willful, which was a word with teeth. Robert Callum's clearance reviews had been triggered the previous week when the preliminary finding was confirmed. Both remaining consulting contracts had been terminated before she'd even known the final finding was coming. His JAG review had concluded with a formal censure. The written finding would be entered into his permanent record and would be publicly accessible through a standard records request, which meant any future employer, any contractor, any institution that ran a background check on Robert Callum would find it. 22 years of a career built on being the person who managed sensitive information responsibly, and a 6-paragraph recommendation he'd put in a drawer had become the public, permanent, findable record of who he actually was. The censure is formal as of today, Forsyth said. It's in the system. Megan sat at her kitchen table. The crayon drawing was still on the refrigerator. She'd never taken it down. She didn't think she would. The other records, the 3 others, she said. 2 have been located and processed, both deceased. Their families were notified yesterday. Forsyth paused. The 3rd individual, her name is Sergeant First Class Renata Okafor, retired. She's in Georgia. She received her notification last night. A pause. She's been told her commendation recommendation is being processed. Her commanding officer filed it in 2017. Megan was quiet for a moment. She didn't know Renata Okafor. She'd never served with her, never met her, but she knew what it was to be told that something long filed away was being seen. She thought about what that phone call had felt like to receive, and then she thought about what it had felt like to wait for it without knowing it was coming for years, and she hoped Okafor had someone with her when the call came. Your paperwork, Forsyth said. The formal commendation process. I'd like to discuss a ceremony. It doesn't need to be a ceremony. I know it doesn't need to be. Forsyth's voice had something in it that wasn't quite firm, but was adjacent to firm. Ms. Holloway, I've been in this branch for 23 years. I have presided over a great number of commendation ceremonies, including some that were significantly delayed. In my experience, the ceremony matters, not for the institution, but for the person. A pause. You held a line in the dark in 2019. You did it without anyone watching. Let someone watch this time. She didn't answer immediately. She thought about 23 years old and scared and competent in equal measure. She thought about the specific texture of that night, the smell, the sound, the 2 shocks and the 2 rhythms, and how she'd compressed it into something small and carried it. She thought about what it meant to stop compressing it, to let it take up the space it actually occupied. Portland, she said. I don't want it in a base, somewhere neutral. Portland is manageable, Forsyth said. I'll make arrangements. She called Ryan at 8 that night. He answered his own phone, which was new. Danny had been answering it for weeks. His voice was stronger than the video call, not all the way back, but moving. I saw the IG finding, he said. Warren told me. He tells everyone everything. It's a skill. A pause. How are you? She thought about the question. It was a question people asked without expecting a real answer, and Ryan was asking it expecting one. She could tell the difference by now. I'm okay, she said. Better than okay. I'm actually fine, Ryan. I think I'm actually fine. That took a while. It did. She heard him exhale, long, slightly uneven, the breath of someone whose lungs were still recovering their capacity. Lily wants to video call you. She has a lot of questions about the hospital. She's decided she wants to be a doctor, which Danny is very calm about, and I'm completely unprepared for. Tell her I'll take the call. She'll make you look at 17 drawings. I know. Tell her I want to see all of them. He was quiet for a moment. She could hear faintly the background sounds of his house, a television somewhere, a child's voice saying something indistinct, the ordinary domestic noise of a life that was continuing. Megan. His voice dropped slightly. I know I can't. There's no version of thank you that covers it. I've tried writing it down and it doesn't. So I'm just going to say that you are the reason my daughters know what their father looks like, and I'm going to stop there before I make a complete mess of myself. She looked at the refrigerator. 2 crayon figures at the bottom of a drawing next to a hospital with a yellow roof. Repaint the kitchen, she said. That's the thank you I want. He laughed, and the laugh was real and ragged and exactly what she'd hoped for. "It's already done," he said. "Sage green, Danny picked it. It's actually great." The ceremony was on a Friday in October, in a conference room at the Portland VA's administrative building. Not grand, not staged, exactly the neutral venue she'd asked for. Forsyth arranged it with the particular efficiency that Megan had come to understand as her baseline mode. Warren flew up from wherever he'd been. Beck was there. The man with the scar, whose name she'd finally learned was James Talbot, drove up from Medford. Aldridge came. She hadn't invited him, but he'd asked Denise, and Denise had told him the details, which Megan registered as its own small data point about how things had shifted. He stood in the back and was quiet, which was the right thing to be. Kowalski came. Margaret Holt came. Cal Reeves was there, as press. She'd approved it, after thinking about it for 2 days and deciding that Forsyth was right, that being seen mattered, that the record should include this moment alongside the other moments. Major Louis Derrick was there by video, from Arizona, a 71-year-old man on a tablet propped on a chair, wearing a collared shirt, who looked at the camera with the expression of someone who had been waiting a long time for a particular thing to be done correctly. Forsyth presented the Commendation Medal with Combat 5 device in the language of the official citation, which she read aloud in full. The date, the grid, the casualties, the actions, the assessment of those actions under the standards of valor in a combat environment. She read it without editorializing, without softening or inflating. She read it the way Major Derrick had written it, which was in the plain, specific language of someone describing exactly what they'd seen. When Forsyth pinned the medal, Megan stood still and let her. She didn't make a speech. She'd been clear about that. She said 2 sentences to the room afterward, not prepared, not practiced. "I was doing my job. The fact that it mattered is because of who it mattered for." She stopped. She looked at the tablet on the chair where Louis Derrick was watching. He gave her a single nod. She gave one back. That was enough. Afterward, in the corridor, Beck found her before she made it to the exit. He was still the youngest of Warren's group by a visible margin, and he had the slightly formal manner of someone who'd been coached on what to say and was going to say it regardless. "I was on the QRF," he said, "the response team that came in behind you that night. I didn't get there in time to see what you did, but I got there in time to see Ryan alive, when the report said he wouldn't be." He stopped. He looked at the floor and then back at her. "I've been in this for 12 years. I don't say this about many people." Another stop. "You're the reason he made it to the LZ. Every good thing that came after, every bit of it starts with what you did in those 11 minutes. She looked at him. She thought about something to say that was proportionate and real and not deflective. "He did the work too," she said. "He decided to stay." Beck nodded. He understood that, she could tell. The medical truth of it, that you couldn't do the work for someone entirely, that there was always a moment where the body decided, and what you were doing as the clinician was extending the window for that decision to come. He did, but you gave him the window. She took the elevator down to the lobby. Warren was waiting, coffee in hand, looking at his phone with an expression that suggested something mildly irritating had just arrived. "What?" she said. "Nothing. Flight stuff." He looked up. He looked at the medal, then at her face. He didn't say anything about either. "Thank you," she said. "For all of it. The calls, the contacts. Holt, Reeves, the board." She paused. "You didn't ask permission." "No," he said. "I didn't." "I'm not complaining." He handed her the second coffee he'd apparently been holding in reserve. She took it. They stood in the VA lobby while people moved around them, and outside the Portland afternoon was doing the October thing of being slightly more beautiful than it had any right to be given the season. "Ryan wants you to come to Seattle," Warren said, "when he's cleared for visitors outside the immediate family." Danny said. He stopped. He looked like he was deciding whether to repeat the exact words. "She said the girls have been asking about you since the article came out. Cora apparently told her preschool class that her dad was saved by a nurse who was also a soldier, and the teacher sent home a note." Megan pressed her lips together. "What kind of note?" "The good kind." He paused. "They want you at the table." That's what Danny said. "She said they want you at the table like family." She looked at the lobby floor. Gray tile. Unremarkable. the kind of floor in every institutional building she'd ever been in. She thought about the small perimeter she'd built, the 3 houseplants, the comfortable chair, the book she was always in the middle of, the Sunday calls home, the life size specifically, not to spill over. She thought about what it felt like to have built that and what it had cost her, and what she was going to do differently. "Tell her yes," she said. She drove back to Ashford in the afternoon light. She had 2 days off before her next shift, which she used imperfectly. She slept too much the first day and not enough the second. She called her mother and this time told her most of the truth about the last month, which her mother received with a silence that lasted about 4 seconds and then dissolved into a sound that was both cry and laugh that only mothers could make. She watered the plants. She started a new book and actually read 40 pages before she fell asleep in the chair, which was its own form of progress. She said yes to Kowalski's offer on Monday morning in a 2-minute conversation in the corridor outside the oncology ward because the corridor was where she happened to be when she decided, and she saw no reason to make it formal. Kowalski said, "Good." And then, "When do you want to start?" "Tell me what it involves first." "Fair," Kowalski said, and they agreed to a meeting Thursday. She spent the week working her floor and thinking about what the role would mean practically, the additional responsibility, the protocol input, the mentorship of nurses who were newer. There was a nurse named Tobias who'd been on the floor for 6 months and had the particular combination of good instincts and uncertain confidence that meant he needed someone to tell him specifically what he'd done right, not just what to improve. There was a nursing student on rotation who was so terrified of making a mistake that she was moving too slowly to be effective, which was the fear doing more damage than any actual error would have. These were people she could do something for. These were problems she knew how to address because she'd been both of those things, the uncertain one, the terrified one, and had come out the other side. She was 31 years old. She had come out the other side. The 3-month mark of Ryan's transplant was a Tuesday in November, and Hale sent a report that Warren forwarded with a single line of his own underneath it. The report was clinical and specific and indicated that Ryan Mercer's recovery was tracking in the top percentile of transplant outcomes for his diagnosis category, and that the 6-month assessment, which would provide the more definitive long-term prognosis, was scheduled for February. Warren's line underneath was, "He called me at 7 a.m. He'd just had breakfast with his kids. He wanted me to know it was the best breakfast he'd ever eaten." She kept that one. She didn't delete it. She let it sit in her messages where she could find it. She went to Seattle the week before Thanksgiving, driving up on a Saturday morning through the specific November gray of Western Oregon and Washington that she'd come to think of as her climate, the climate she'd chosen without fully meaning to and had decided to keep. She listened to a podcast about deep-sea biology for 2 hours and thought about nothing except what the narrator was describing, which was its own kind of luxury. Danny met her at the door of a house in a Seattle neighborhood that was residential and quiet and had a front yard in the process of being reorganized, something new being planted near the fence, in the way you plant things when you've decided you're staying. She was exactly what Megan had built from the voice and the texts, practical, warm, with the particular toughness of someone who'd spent 8 months in a hospital corridor, keeping her composure together by force of will, and had not fully set that composure down yet, even now that it was, mostly, no longer necessary. "I've been looking forward to this," Danny said. She said it simply, without performance. "Me too," Megan said, which was also true and simpler than she'd expected it to be. Lily was 9 and solemn and had brought 3 drawings to present, which she did with the focus of someone making a formal presentation. The first was a nurse and a soldier shaking hands. The second was a hospital with a very detailed parking lot. The third was something that Lily explained was the inside of a person's blood, which was anatomically fanciful but demonstrated a genuine effort at biological accuracy that Megan found genuinely impressive and said so. Cora was 6 and had decided Megan was her friend on the basis of approximately 45 seconds of introduction, and spent the next hour finding her in whatever room she moved to and showing her things: a rock with an interesting texture, a book about frogs, a stuffed animal whose entire history she narrated with complete confidence. Ryan was in the living room when Megan came through, sitting in a chair rather than on the couch because the chair gave him better leverage when he needed to stand. He'd lost weight he hadn't fully regained. He was visibly thinner than the photo Warren had shown her in the parking lot months ago, and there was a quality of deliberate care in the way he moved that told her the body was still in the process of remembering its own capacities. But his eyes were clear and his voice, when he stood to meet her, was the strongest it had been in any of their conversations. He didn't say anything formal. He said, "You look exactly like I thought you would," which was what she'd said to him on the video call, and she recognized it and felt something come loose in her chest that had been held tightly. "Stop stealing my lines," she said. He laughed. He was still laughing when Cora came back with the frog book and required immediate adult attention, and Ryan looked at his daughter with an expression that Megan had no words for, the expression of a man who had been given more time and was aware of every single minute of it. They ate dinner together. Danny had cooked something that was good in the way of food made by someone who finds cooking genuinely stabilizing rather than performative. They talked for a long time about things that were not the events of the last year: Ryan's work, the veterans his organization had placed, a particular guy he'd stayed in contact with who'd just gotten a job in construction management and sent a photo of his first crew. Lily's opinions about her teacher, which were complex. Cora's frog book, which apparently had a sequel. At some point, Megan looked around the kitchen and registered the walls. Sage green, even in the November light, a warm, considered color that worked with the white of the cabinets and the dark wood of the table in a way that was unremarkable in the best sense, the way good choices become unremarkable once they're made. "The kitchen," she said. Ryan followed her look. He was quiet for a moment. Danny picked the color. "It's right," Megan said. "It is." He looked at it the way he'd looked at his daughter, with the awareness of someone who understood what it had almost cost him to get here. The previous owners had it yellow, like aggressively yellow. "I heard. It was a lot." She drove home that evening in the dark, the November highway quiet and cold, the radio off. She thought about the dinner and the drawings and Cora's frog and Ryan's expression when he looked at his daughter. She thought about the particular relief of being around people who knew exactly what she was and weren't strange about it. Who could hold the 2019 road and the pediatric ward and the commendation and the parking lot at midnight and all the rest of it without needing her to explain which version of herself she was today, because they understood that there was only one. She thought about what she knew now that she hadn't known before. Not tactically, not clinically. Something harder to name. She knew that being overlooked was not the same as being invisible. She knew that what you did in the dark, the choices you made when no one was watching, when you were 23 and scared and working on instinct and training, those things didn't disappear when no one documented them. They propagated forward. They became a man who built something that mattered, who had daughters named Lily and Cora, who ate breakfast with his family on a Tuesday in November and called his friend to say it was the best breakfast he'd ever had. She knew that the people who dismissed her, Crow with her selective file, Callum with his initial drawer, everyone who'd looked at a nurse and seen only the category, they had not been seen clearly. That failure of vision was theirs. It had never been an accurate description of what she was. She'd spent 3 years making herself small because small felt safe, and what she understood now was that she'd been solving for the wrong variable. Safety wasn't the point. The work was the point. The floor was the point. Preston's dinosaur opinions and Sophie's cat drawing and Tobias's uncertain confidence and every family she'd sat with in a corridor at midnight and told the truth about what they were facing, that was the point. She'd been doing it all along. She'd never stopped. She'd just stopped believing it was being seen. It was being seen. It had always been being seen by the people who mattered, her patients, their families, the man she'd kept alive on a dirt road who'd spent 6 years trying to find her name. The rest was administration. She crossed the Oregon state line somewhere after 9, the dark highway opening out into the familiar topography of the valley, and she thought, I am 31 years old. I have a floor to run. I have nurses to teach. I have patients who need someone who will fight for them in the specific way that I know how to fight. She thought about Tobias, who'd done something correct last week and needed to hear it from someone who knew the difference. She thought about the nursing student with the paralytic fear of error and what it would take to get through to her and how she knew what to say because she'd been that student in a different form, in a worse environment, and someone, somewhere in her training years ago, had said the exact right thing. She thought about what she was going to say. She pulled off the highway and into Ashford 20 minutes later. The pine tree on the corner, the gas station. The hospital's north face lit at night, visible from 3 blocks away. Her apartment was quiet. The plants needed water, which she'd known. She watered them. She made tea, not coffee, because it was late and she was choosing sleep. She stood at her kitchen counter and looked at the window where the glass held her reflection. Herself, clear and specific. The person she'd always been. She thought about a young woman on a dirt road in the dark, holding a pulse in her hands, deciding not to stop. She had never been the person who stopped.